Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Evan R. Liblit Memorial Scholarship Committee's fall series of the Larry Swanson Waste on Wednesday seminars. My name's Eric Swenson. I'm pleased to serve as your moderator today. But first, I'd like to take a minute or two to let you know about the Liblit Scholarship Committee, if you don't know about us already, and to learn a little bit about what we do and what's coming up. For those of you who are not fortunate enough to know him, Evan Liblit was a highly respected colleague who passed away at age 47 in 1995. In his way too short life, he worked for the EPA, the DEC, the town of Babylon, and a private recycling company. He also found time to teach at Stony Brook University. In the mid-1970s, while working for the EPA in Manhattan, he organized an office paper recycling program for federal buildings. The EPA then loaned him to the DEC, and in 1997, he was sent to Albany to craft the state's first recycling plan. He also helped form what grew to become the Association of Long Island Recycling Officials. His pioneering efforts and his personality motivated many of us while he was here. After his passing, a number of his colleagues created a scholarship fund at Stony Brook University to continue his legacy. Over the last 24 years, we have provided scholarships to 24 graduate students and 18 undergraduate students. And those figures don't include the ones that we are awarding this year. Many have gone on to become leaders in their field. Our funds are raised at an annual breakfast held each year around America Recycles Day, and it will be a week from today at the Irish Coffee Pub, and you can still register and attend. And it's a great way to network and to hear the latest in solid waste. Our funds are raised at that breakfast and also at the Federation Solid Waste Conference each May. But unfortunately, over the last 2 years, the COVID situation has prevented us from doing this fundraising. Hopefully, we will be able to get back into that soon. Ironically, however, with the advent of Zoom, this committee has been more active than ever before. In 2020, we held our first symposium at Stony Brook to a standing room only crowd to address the recycling crisis. Last year, COVID forced us back to the drawing board and we began a series of webinars. Their success has led us to continue with both spring and fall series each year. This fall, we're holding 5 of these topics. Sponsorships and suggestions for topics are always welcome. And in terms of logistics, we will mute everyone except for the speakers. And if you have any questions, please enter them into the chat box on your screen, and I will group them together and ask them for of the speakers at the end of both presentations. As you saw, this webinar is being recorded and a link will be available to view at a later time. Today's session will address electronic waste recycling, and we have 2 speakers. Our first speaker is Kate Kitchener. Kate began her work in, excuse me. Kate began her work in waste prevention by implementing waste reduction strategies and testing alternative packaging options in the private sector. Seeing the success of these programs inspired her to realize similar policies on a larger scale, acquiring a master's degree in energy and environmental policy from the University of Delaware. In her current position as the Chief of Staff at the New York City Department of Sanitation Bureau of Recycling and Sustainability, Kate is integral in moving the Bureau's initiatives forward, including programs to recycle organics, textiles, and electronics. She also has a strong focus on extended producer responsibility legislation and serves on the boards of both the Product Stewardship Institute and the New York Product Stewardship Council. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kate and you can hear her presentation.
Thanks so much, Eric, for that warm introduction. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, everyone see that?
Looks great.
Great, thank you. So here's the big problem, right? Too much e-waste. So we've been waiting 10 years for the DEC to issue regulations for this law that initially went into effect in 2011. They finally issued regulations this fall. There was a public comment period and a couple of hearings in September. And so they're working on, taking in all those comments that they got and finalizing those regulations. So the New York State Electronic Equipment Recycling and Reuse Act requires manufacturers to provide free and convenient recycling of electronic waste to most consumers in the state. And, the law has a lot of challenges, which I'll get into, but there's been a lot of success too. We've seen a 60% of reduction in e-waste in New York City waste stream, which is a huge amount because of this law. And we've also collected over 9,000 tons of e-waste in the city that would have gone to landfill. So there's definitely some good news here, some good stories to talk about. So in New York City, we have a program for high-rise buildings. So any building that's over 10 units, you can get one of these bins like you see in the picture. And it's a free program. It's totally funded by manufacturers. And so it's our partnership with ERI, who's the electronics recycler. And any building that's interested can go to nyc.gov/ecycle to sign up. And this has just been a really great program. It's very convenient for residents. It's no cost to the taxpayer, and it's no cost to city government, which is great. I will say that this is a pretty unusual situation. New York City is a big city. We have a large amount of e-waste. A lot of the other municipalities across the state have been really struggling with this law because they've either been having to charge residents, and actually I think my next slide is about the challenges. Yeah, so a lot of the challenges with the law, the current law, the way that it's written is manufacturer compliance. It only meets the minimal convenience requirements. It only meets the minimal performance standards. So for an example, one of the minimal convenience requirements is mail back. And so imagine putting this TV you see in the picture in an envelope and mailing it back. This is not really a convenient option. And so one of the things that we're trying to fix with the regulations and potentially a statutory change, which I'll get into more, would be making mail back not the minimum for convenience. There would have to be, a drop-off event, a collection, something like that instead. The other problem is that it only meets the minimal performance standards. And so, each manufacturer is required to collect a certain amount of e-waste based on a complicated formula, which you can dig into in the law if you're really interested. But basically what was happening is they were treating this as the maximum, not the minimum. And so they were only collecting a certain amount every year, and then they would stop collection. And municipalities would still have a lot more e-waste that they needed to get rid of. And the manufacturers would be like, oh no, we met our performance standard. We don't need to collect anymore. And so that's been challenging. Another big challenging thing is CRTs, or cathode ray tube TVs, kind of like the one pictured here. They are expensive to manage. They have lead in them. They have other toxic chemicals. And so they're just a complicated thing. They're also very large and bulky and difficult to move, which in a place like New York City, if you don't have a car, it's very challenging. And so municipalities across the state have faced huge financial burdens in dealing with illegal dumping of electronics. And also a lot of municipalities have been having to run additional programs because the manufacturers aren't providing enough options. And so across the state, that's looked like collection events that municipalities are running, and potentially even charging residents to bring back their e-waste. That is definitely was not the intent of the law. The intent is that the manufacturer pays and that the municipalities are able to offer something to their residents. And here in New York City, we actually have been running, so we have the high-rise program, which I mentioned. We do 10 special collection events every year. We also have 5 permanent drop-off sites in the city, and we have over 90 drop-off locations, retail drop-off locations. And even with all of that, it was not enough to manage the e-waste for New York City. So in addition, we added a curbside program where residents could call and request an appointment to get their e-waste picked up at their house. And so it's a lot of material to manage, and convenience really needs to be what it sounds like. Otherwise, you're going to end up with illegal dumping or other issues. So I just want to point that out. DEC proposed the regulations and I believe it was in August of this year. So you can obviously read the whole thing on the DEC's website, but a few of the changes that I wanted to point out that I think are good is number one, the acceptance standard. So as I mentioned before, there was this confusion with manufacturers treating the acceptance standard as the maximum rather than the minimum. And so DEC redefined it as the minimum amount of electronic waste that manufacturers must accept per calendar year. So manufacturers have to continue to go over that if there's still more material out there, which there inevitably is. And they also changed some definitions. So electronic waste includes broken or damaged electronics. So that was a really big problem, especially like with the CRT televisions. And so this is a great change that they made. Also, another issue that's been ongoing with the law is that, because of this acceptance standard definition, the way that manufacturers have viewed it, they weren't providing continuous service to residents as far as collection. And so DEC included this language that a manufacturer must maintain a continuous acceptance program and must not cease the acceptance of electronic waste once it attains its acceptance standard in any year. And so that's also a great thing to see and will really help municipalities. Mailback is strengthened. It's still considered the minimum convenience. Sorry, my desk phone is ringing and I don't know how to make that stop. So apologies for 1 second. So mailback has been strengthened, but I think we'll actually need statutory change to really eliminate it as a minimum convenience. And I'll get into that in a second. So mailback has been added. So an additional method of acceptance for electronic waste exceeding carrier shipping limitations, all required packaging material free of charge to the consumer. So making sure that the consumer has the box or whatever they need in order to return the item. And then they also added pickup at the consumer's location free of charge when no other free method of acceptance is offered and the shipping carrier's drop-off location is not convenient to the consumer. So obviously some room for interpretation there, but definitely working to strengthen this standard, which is great. They also have in several places in the regulations acceptance at no charge. So an electronic waste collector must not charge for the acceptance or receipt of electronic waste from consumers. And so right now, Best Buy, for example, is a little bit of a confusing example because they're both a retailer and a manufacturer, but they're charging $25 for you to return a TV to them. And so hopefully the regulations will kind of stop that practice. They've also strengthened public education requirements. So manufacturers must maintain a public education website, a toll-free telephone number, and there must be like a pamphlet or something when you buy a TV or other electronic that there's information about the law in there. And then they have to do public service announcements, and retailers must provide info at point of sale. So this really strengthens the public education part of the law, which is also really lacking in the original law. So as I mentioned earlier, not everything can be fixed by regulation. We might actually need to get some statutory changes to the law going forward. So some of those would be kind of taking what the DEC has done with the regulations and going a little bit further with things that only could be done by a statutory change. So for example, mailback, like I said, fine for like, a small thing like an iPad, but for a CRT television, not really reasonable. And then just making sure that manufacturers are providing year-round consistent financial support for collection sites, including in their plans, regardless of whether their performance target has been met, increasing the requirement for number of drop-off sites, and offer an alternative to mailback and drop-off in large cities. Like I said, over half of New York City residents don't have a car, so convenience means something different in a city of this size. So a couple other things that might need to be changed through statutory changes. So one thing that's been kind of complicated is that B2B material has been included in the performance standard formula. And so that is really kind of changes the balance of like how that formula is made. And really, I think would make more sense if it was just residential material and not business material in the balance. And then just making sure that collection is free for municipalities. So include provisions prohibiting manufacturers or their representatives from charging municipalities for covered electronic equipment management. which I think really is the intent of an EPR law, is to make sure that the burden does not fall on the municipalities when it comes to the cost. So that was a bit in the weeds, but hopefully made some sense. And I think we're going to do questions at the very end, so I'll leave it there. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kate. Our next speaker is Phil Fava. Phil is the Managing Director of eGreen Recycling Management, LLC in Holtzville, and he's also the CEO and President of PK Metals. He's also currently the legislative chair for the ISRI New York chapter, that's the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, and is a past treasurer and trustee of the Good Shepherd Hospice in New York. He earned his bachelor's degree in business management, marketing, and accounting at SUNY Albany. And with that, I'll turn it over to Phil.
Eric, thanks so much. Thank you for the opportunity. And let me get my screen up here. All right, do you see it? Do you have it?
Looks perfect.
Okay, great. All right, so the past, present, and future. So with my presentation, hopefully I'm going to bring a couple of, I guess, facts up, some duplication from Kate's, and hopefully this could prompt some questions so I can answer in a more detailed fashion. So hazardous waste recognition started back in the 40s. Everyone knows about Love Canal, about the toxic waste, the chemicals that was dumped into the canal, byproducts of their manufacturing process. Unfortunately, this happens even to today with the manufacturers. Let's take it like from someone like Grumman and Fairchild, both sites. We've picked a lot of scrap up over the years from them. And they had tremendous amount of machining done, and they worked with a lot of different elements that were hazardous to the ground. They treated it and they diluted, and by dilution, and then before you know it, it's in dry wells. And again, it's a problem that kept on going, which brought recognition for environmental regulation. Same thing with the barge out of Philadelphia that had a lot of electronic waste, what they burned, and that, as you know, traveled around almost 10 countries. Which led to the Basel area network on shipping anything overseas that's toxic. Okay, legislation that was prompted: Solid Waste Disposal Act, the Resource Recovery Act, Resource Conservation Recovery Act, and presently, as Kate said, she talked about the EPR, which the EPR. Product stewardship. That was an environmental management approach that replaced the responsibility on all manufacturers and users, also the users, to manage and minimize environmental impact of the product throughout the product's life cycle. It also was supposed to shift the financial and management responsibility with government oversight to the producer and away from the consumer, which as an e-waste recycler, that sometimes becomes a little bit difficult because over the years, when this program first started, when the OEM program first started, there was, I guess, a lot of money in the program from the OEMs that covered a lot of the cost of recycling. As time went on, the values of the products became less, and it was very, very hard to meet that threshold for even to break even. But it also, at that time, the EPR incentivizes the producers to incorporate environmental consideration into the design of their products. Now, ISRI started a program, and it's called Design for Recycling, and they give out awards to many manufacturers. We would go visit, for example, Dell, HP, sit and talk with them and see if they could manage to manufacture products that make it so much easier for us to recycle. For example, contain the maximum amount of materials that are recyclable, be easy to recycle through currently and newly designed recycling processes and procedures, be cost effective to recycle, however, the cost of the recycling does not exceed the value of the recycled materials, be hazardous, be free of hazardous materials, and maintain the cost involved to recycle the product, and to reduce the use of raw material by using more recycled components. and have a net gain in the overall recyclability of the product while reducing overall negative impact on the environment. Then the Crt rule was introduced, and that basically would it allowed the recyclers to take in CRTs, which Crt mentioned before. They do have a component. Normal CRT weighs between 60 and 70 pounds. 2/3 of it is plate glass, which is clean, but the other is hazardous. So the DEC and the EPA allowed us to handle this material and take it off and being excluded from the hazardous waste designation. And it had to be sent to a smelter to be refined, to take the lead out. Otherwise, it would be considered hazardous waste. Okay, the OEM programs. We deal with the OEMs as a certified provider. We need to be certified to handle. So, for example, let me go to, just move around to this certifications. Okay, you have to handle e-waste, you need to be either R2 certified, E-Steward, SNAID, NIST, or ISO. And we go through a process every year to be recertified to handle the product so that our downstreams are all vetted, they're all approved. And ANAB is the governing body which comes into audit. And it's the audits are very, very rigorous. They could last up to 3 days. And it gets so specific as they'll see, for example, when we bring the product in, they'll see that some product gets reused, resold, another product we take apart. And on every circuit board, there's a button battery. And you go to say, could I see the BOL where that button battery went? And if we couldn't prove that we shipped it to a certified downstream, we would lose our certification. The OEM would not use us any longer. And this is what keeps everyone in the same playing field. I'm going to go back to, excuse me one second. So, in our facility, we accept all types of e-waste. It could be computers, could be TVs, could be servers, could be telephone equipment. We also accept from municipalities. And what we do is break down every product to go to a smelter for value. If we can reuse, that's the first thing. And then if we can't, then we have to recycle. Not everything can be done at any one facility because, like, for example, where I am on Long Island, we have a warehouse, material comes in, we take it apart for its final disposition, and certain items have to be, sent to a smelter for further smelting for circuit boards. Steel can go to a steel mill. Plastic goes to a plastic reuser. We also grind plastic on our site, and we make a regrind, and we also pulverize, and we put that back out into the market for reuse. This is the, I guess, as we know, e-waste. This is what everyone's familiar with. The problem that we have is the definition of what e-waste is. A lot of people realize that they just think that if it's a plug-in, it's e-waste. So we get a lot of product that does not fall under this program, and we cannot get subsidized for that. And like what Kate said before, a large issue we have is the community component of education. It's very, very difficult to explain to individuals when they come here. They'll bring all sorts of items that really, like a speaker, you'll see over here to the left, the speaker. That speaker is made of wood. And it has very, very little metal in it, and they consider that e-waste. So it comes into our facility, goes back out as waste. It's really not recyclable. It's just not, you consider it under the program for DEC as e-waste. So the educational piece is going to be very, very important, you know, moving forward. And hopefully they're trying to get the manufacturers to come forward with a program for that. And it'll be very, very helpful. I know Kate said that they had 9,000 ton that they have in New York City. What we've seen out here from the municipalities is the weights for the past 3 to 4 years are actually falling off. And that's due to, we feel it's the size of the products. The CRTs are not as many coming through. They've been like out of service for many, many years. So you don't see too many of that. You may see some school districts. TVs, everyone still has a TV in their basement. So we do see that, but that's falling off also. But a flat screen TV compared to a CRT is half the weight. So the volumes are falling off, and the e-waste recyclers out here are having a hard time maintaining the programs, and because of we can't meet the required amount that the OEMs are looking to recycle. And so these are examples of what e-waste should be. And then we have categories by the DEC, what we report to. Now, through the OEM program, we work through a collective, and a collective will represent 5, 6, maybe even up to 10 OEMs, and they have the capacity, software capacity, to report back to the state. So we collect for the OEMs, for the collective itself. We report back to the DEC every year, and every year they will match up with their OEM to make sure the weights are matching. The problems with the items that we do handle, the metals, the rare earth metals, the plastics, the minerals that are in there, which we call focus material, and that's the arsenic, beryllium, the cadmium, lead, lithium, mercury, nickel, chromium. That is in almost every electronic that we do handle. The biggest issue that we have is dealing with batteries. Every item, every electronic has a battery, either most of them come through with lithiums, but there's several different types of lithiums. You got the polymer, you have the button battery, the rechargeables, and the cost to recycle this has gone up almost double in the past, I would say, 2 to 3 years. You got mercury switches that are on circuit boards. They're on a lot of phone equipment. That has to be removed before it goes through the downstream, because if it goes to a downstream, it'll get smelted and it'll go through the stacks into the air. So they all have to be removed. So it's not as easy as everyone thinks. And it's, again, the educational piece to bring, when someone comes here with batteries, to explain to them what battery, how to sort the battery. It's like almost impossible. Like we have some programs where we put boxes out and they just throw every type of battery in there. And we're trying to move away from that, because batteries also, if they touch each other, you could have a fire hazard. Once they spark, the battery will not go out. The flame will not go out until it is totally exhausted. So it's very, very dangerous. And that's another piece that we're trying to have the OEMs bring forward. Another part that we do is audits on data protection, where we have, we'll take in items from, let's say, for example, a township, or it could be a B2B business, or it could be a financial company, and they will bring us computers and servers with hard drives in it. And we have to take the data, and what we do is we shred it. A lot of people would wipe, but we shred. And once you shred it, a hard drive information is very, very difficult to get out from that point. As you can see here, just recently there was a breach with Morgan Stanley, where they hired a firm to take down a data center, and they went through a third party. They never wiped the drives, and the material was repurposed. So as a R2 certified vendor, we have to follow a protocol, and we have to prove that we wipe these drives. And during the audit process, if, let's say, for example, we do get a hard drive in that can be repurposed and we go to wipe it compared to shredding it, this has to go with a document showing that it was wiped and before it could be reused. And the circular economy, again, as products come in, consumer to reuse, repair, the recycling sector, and design to manufacture, it just goes round and round. And the bottom line is, I think we need to get to a point where the mentality of consumers, homeowners, most of them feel that if they're not getting the value for these products, they just want to throw them in the garbage. Everyone thinks that, since you're recycling it, there's money involved with it. Basically, it's a cost avoidance in many cases. And as long as we can get this educational piece out to people, I think we'll maintain, and we'll probably get to the goals that we want to get to regarding recycling more product. I know Kate mentioned about the minimum that they have to do. I think at one point, the OEMs, I believe it was 10% of their volume, with an increase of 10% now through the next few years. I don't know if it's 2024 or longer, but they want to maintain, they're trying to get to as much, I don't know if they'll ever get to 100%, but we're trying to get each year an increase of their products to be recycled. Like I mentioned before, we could repair to resell, so it stays out of the recycling stream altogether. We'll dismantle to scrap the devices for and reuse some components, and the rest of the items either they go out to a smelter to get smelted for final disposition, and they come back when they get smelted. That comes back in a product that they can reuse. So when they talk about putting recycled products back into a computer, for example, the copper that comes out, they'll make copper ingots. That copper ingot goes back to a wire manufacturer. Wire manufacturer will then sell that to the chip makers, and the whole process starts over. And you're not using raw material, and it's very, very good for the carbon footprint. Future and growth. As Kate said before, the DEC is proposing new updates, which I think is very, very important because so many years have passed by, and I think new regulation is very, very important. And that's the way I think we will probably gain the amount of recycling that we want to do. And I know that I was on that call in August with them speaking about the new regulation. There's some items, there's some issues with it, but I'm sure that there's always going to be issues because as a stakeholder, we do have the ability and the opportunity to sit with legislatures, and we do speak with them, and we try to explain why we could do something and why we cannot do something before they try to pass something that's almost impossible for us to do. You have a technical part and a fundamental part of any business. And technically, it all sounds good when you look at it and what they want to do. But when it comes down to the fundamentals, it's very, very difficult to achieve, what they want to be achieved. Okay, high rates of production by plant obsolescence means a growing number of devices. But, barely the middle age is still functioning well, but are being marked for electronic euthanasia. Nonetheless, we're hoping to what's happening now is if you notice, most items don't last that long. You go buy a device years ago, a device with like for example, a refrigerator could last 10 to 15 years. Now you go buy a new refrigerator, they tell you got about a 6 or 7 year life. So that's going to come into the waste stream earlier. They're going to add a lot more items to this e-waste list. which should increase the amount of recycling that we can maintain and generate. So they're saying it's estimated that we will generate 75 million metric tons of global e-waste by 2030, which is very substantial. This is basically, I talked about that before. The conclusion, what we really want to do is we want to maintain high recycling rates. And sometimes it's unsustainable, but we will work, with the local authorities and the programs. And as a recycler, we will continue to do our job as the best that we can. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Kate. We do not have any questions in the chat. So if you do have any, please, this is the time to add them in there. I guess I'll start out with a question for Phil. Phil, you mentioned that as part of your process, you do recycle some of the plastics that are contained in the electronics. Since to my knowledge, the electronics plastics don't have the resin type symbol on them. I'm just wondering how you differentiate the different resin types and what kind of markets you've been having for the plastics that you regrind, et cetera.
We regrind industrial plastics. The computer plastic is sorted into like two categories. It's very, very difficult. There is a marking on it. There's ABS, there's ABS-FR, which is the fire retardant. You can't blend them together because they don't melt the same. So you can't find, it's very, very difficult to find a home with any value. It's almost like taking mixed colored glass and mixed it together. It's almost the same thing. It's like, it's very, very low value, if any. So not all the items are marked, but printers have HIPS, HIPS. It's marked on it. A lot of the plastics are marked. So you're saying that they're not?
On the electronics, I have not noticed them marked. I know on consumer products, food products, containers, they are.
The mark 1, 2, 3, and 4. There is some markings on some electronics. There is, but again, very, very hard to sort because once you take apart, several pieces, then to sort them because they're small, it could take forever. So what we do is blend them together. They get baled and they go out to a market. And they basically use this material for filler, to be honest with you. But it's not profitable at all.
We still have no one's posted any questions. Oh, here's a question. Is there a breakdown for the concentration of rare earth metals by devices? That is, are laptops the major sources or cell phones?
Is there a breakdown?
No, where most the rare earth metals are found.
Most of the metals are found in the circuit board. And if you're talking about rare earth magnets, that's in hard drives. But most of the elements are in circuit boards. So a circuit board has lead on it. It has copper, gold, silver, and sometimes palladium. And that's the breakdown. That's where the bulk of the material, that type of element comes. The battery has to be removed because that cannot go to a smelter that handles circuit boards. That's a hazard to them. They could actually start a fire in their process, in the shredding process.
Anybody else have any questions? Another question just came in. Where do we dispose of regular batteries, the AA's and the AAA's?
All right, as per the New York State DEC, alkaline batteries can be thrown into the trash. So you can see that on their website.
Anybody else? If not, we'll thank our speakers and let you all go to lunch. And just let me remind you that one of our major fundraisers, our only fundraiser this year, will be the Evan Liblit breakfast next week, a week from today. It's the 17th, 2 weeks from today. We will have it at the Irish Coffee Pub in East Islip, and it's open to everybody. We do ask that you register in advance, and I have sent around to everybody here, I believe, the form in order to do that. And it starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, goes to 10 o'clock, and it helps raise funds for the scholarships that we offer. You'll be able to meet this year's scholars. There'll be a guest speaker who will speak on the topic of climate regulations in New York, and we will hope to see you there. And just so you know, we put in the chat that this recording of this event will be on the SoMAS YouTube page in the next couple of days. So feel free to write down the link, or if you need to, just email us and we will get the link to you. So thank you again, everybody, and we hope you enjoyed it.